Anyone who has ever heard of geomancy, power places, or similar will certainly have come across the term ley lines. Ley lines are energy lines that are said to extend across the entire Earth and form a large network. But what are these ley lines all about? First of all, the term. Alfred Watkins, a merchant who traveled around the British Isles in the 1920s, coined the term. He was an early automobile enthusiast and often had maps with him. One day he noticed something. He realized that significant sites such as stone circles, wall sites, or churches were arranged in a straight line, forming an alignment. Furthermore, he noticed that the places were mainly localities with the suffix ley, such as Kingsley or Oxley. He then named these strange lines Leys. In the 1968s and 1970s, thanks to the hippie movement, ley lines experienced a revival of interest. Dowsers discovered zones where Alfred Watkins had mapped these lines and discovered other energetic phenomena. These strange lines were eventually called ley lines. There was also a magazine, the so-called Ley Hunter, which was on the road tracking down ley lines in the landscape. On the one hand, cartographically, and on the other hand, with dowsing rods and pendulums. It is interesting to note that the churches were located in places ending in ley, which indicates woodland-free areas. Similar to road or raid in the Harz Mountains, this refers to places that have been cleared. Ley lines, however, were naturally forest-free, which made them special. Leys seem to have been naturally free of woodland. A well-known example is the Loreley Rock. This rock is ley, so to speak, where nothing grows because the soil has too little humus. It is curious, however, that the villages were lined up like pearls along these straight lines in these forest-free zones. To understand this, we have to go way back to early land occupation. An area is often referred to as fallow or forest-free if it is surrounded by forest. Why did people settle there? If there is no forest, it could be too wet for forest, or there is a lack of humus which makes agriculture difficult. It is likely that another cause is that the inner quality of the ley line naturally prevented growth, and it was comfortable to move in such natural lanes in the forest. These primal paths or primal trails were paths you could walk along. Obviously, the places along such ley lines were special, as temples, stone circles, ring walls, or churches were built there. Another special feature is that the churches built in these places were disproportionately often dedicated to dragon slayers, such as St. George, St. Michael, or sometimes St. Margaret. Indeed, these ley lines seem to be something special. In the immediate vicinity of such lines, the vegetation grows particularly lush, while in the center area it sometimes appears to be scorched. Sometimes the trees lean away, and from certain perspectives on hills, these aisles are visible. I have a few shots like this, including one of Croagh Patrick in Ireland, the holy mountain of the Irish and Ireland's national sanctuary. If you stand up there, you can see several perfectly straight lines leading up to the mountain. It is even plausible that such line systems played a role in the conquest of land and were possibly later artificially kept free of vegetation. We are aware of a similar phenomenon in the Inca jackal system, where straight lines were drawn into the country from Cusco, and each family clan was tasked with keeping its line free of vegetation, a custom that is still practiced to this day in some cases. Here we appear to have a lineage that has to do with a kind of dragon power. Otherwise, the churches would not be all dedicated to dragon slayers. Furthermore, the vegetation, in other words, the growth of plants and the vitality of the earth, influences the area around the ley lines so strongly that it grows particularly lushly there, which was very favorable for early agriculture. In the core area, this influence was somewhat less strong, which enabled the existence of primeval paths along which people could move and trade. For the pragmatic aspects of life alone, especially in the Stone Age, such places were ideal settlements. The word ley also means something like light and is used in slang for a footpath in England, often called a ley. It symbolizes something light, something open. It is even possible that these place names refer not only to the fact that they were naturally woodland-free, but that the light quality of the lines was noticeable there. Many years ago, we organized a congress on the subject of ley lines. Lines of the spirit, lines of power, question mark. In actual fact, both can be observed. The subject of ley lines and their spiritual or psychic qualities is fascinating and seems to be present in various cultures and traditions. Paul Devereux, a renowned geomancer and etymologist, has noted that in Central and South America, shamans use ley lines for trance journeys and soul flights, indicating a spiritual or psychic quality to such lines. The arrangement of churches along such lines, like a string of pearls, suggests that there is a deep connection between spiritual or mythological ideas and the ley lines. Many sagas and legends are associated with these places. In Munich, for example, the 12 apostles are said to walk from the Frauenkirche to the Heiliggeistkirche, or from the Heiliggeistkirche to the Frauenkirche during the Quartember days, which are boost days every quarter of the year in the Catholic Church. Doors would open and close as if by magic. The lights would come on in the Frauenkirche, and a Mass would be celebrated. And if we look here, we can see that the line continues in a southeasterly direction to Maria Ramersdorf, a pilgrimage church. And on very old plans, we can still see that an avenue of linden trees connected Munich with Ramersdorf, which ran exactly along this line. In addition, the Wurmeck, the Worm Corner at Munich City Hall, is also located on this line, which is associated with an old dragon legend in which a lindworm emerged from the earth. So here in Germany too, there are such line systems that have a strong influence on vital energy on the one hand and a vital and spiritual aspect on the other. Personally, I often have the feeling that my crown chakra seems to open up when I walk through such a line across its core area. Special qualities can be felt in such places, and if you settle down there and begin to dream or even undertake a trance journey, for example through a shamanic drum journey, it is actually much easier to immerse yourself in such a soul flight. Ley lines are one thing. There is also a sub-variant, if you like, the so-called dragon lines. These also run straight through the country, spanning the globe and connecting very old pilgrimage churches and former places of worship. The dragon lines have an even stronger spiritual quality and are located on the primal force level of the earth. I would like to say something about the global mapping works that exist. Unfortunately, not many of them are useful. Most of them are based on a simple car atlas, the Dirke World Atlas, or similar sources that simply draw lines somewhere and say, wow, there's Cairo, the pyramids, and also Giza, and of course Stonehenge and so on. If you see such large-scale maps where a dead straight line runs for hundreds or even thousands of kilometers, you can be sure that it's definitely not a ley line. Why? Well, we live on a globe, a sphere, and now there's a problem. If you transfer the geometry of a sphere to a two-dimensional surface, distortions occur. These distortions lead to two main types of map projections: true angle and true area maps. Usually we use true angle maps, but the surfaces are distorted and certain countries appear much larger or smaller than they actually are. On most true angle maps, Africa, for example, appears much smaller compared to Europe, which is due to this distortion. If you transfer straight lines from a sphere to a two-dimensional map, a curvature is created. What is actually a straight line on the sphere becomes a kind of sinus curve if you span the entire globe. This phenomenon can be seen on flight maps, for example, especially on transatlantic flights, which appear to make arcs instead of flying in a straight line from, for example, Munich to New York. Of course, in reality, the planes fly the shortest route, simply to save fuel. This arc is a distortion caused by the two-dimensional map. With very large map systems, lines that are straight in reality must be curved on the map. If a line is shown as straight on a large map, this is an indication of an incorrect projection. On Ordnance Survey maps or hiking maps at a scale of 1 to 25,000, the visualization still works well, but with maps of whole Germany or even Europe, the map projection already leads to considerable distortions. How is such a ley line structured? A classic force ley line, as described by Marko Pogaznik, differs from the shorter connecting ley lines, which are only a few hundred meters or a few kilometers long. Force ley lines consist of an inner core, which is mainly made up of fire ether. This core is surrounded by a tube, which can be circular or even oval. This tube is surrounded by an earth ether field, and strong ether turbulence occurs at the edge. I suspect that the fiery core causes the vegetation in the center of the ley line to appear as if it has been scorched away and to recede. The strong ether or vital force turbulence at the edge, on the other hand, supplies the landscape with a lot of vital energy. On the one hand, ley lines are lines of the mind along which you can move in trance experiences or meditation. They also support mental processes, such as opening the crown chakra. On the other hand, ley lines are actually also lines of power. A ley line is therefore a vital energetic structure of the earth organism, and the comparison with the main energy meridians of our body is not far-fetched, such as the conception and governing vessels. In other words, the Kundalini channel, which runs up the spinal canal. According to Chinese Qigong practice, certain meditative exercises channel the sexual energy, Qing, upwards along this channel, transforming it into Qi and finally into Shen, spirit. And something very similar happens to these lineage systems, in my opinion. Many ley lines carry a certain spiritual theme. It is fascinating to see which churches are located along these lines. They are often dedicated to dragon slayers, but not always. What themes resonate there? Jens Martin Müller, for example, has identified a Grail line that includes places such as Wolfram's Eschenbach, where the famous Wolfram von Eschenbach lived and wrote Parzival, a work related to the Holy Grail. Karlsruhe, where themes of the Holy Grail are also present, and places in France which repeatedly take up this meta-theme of the Grail, also lie along this line. Such lines and spiritual networks seem to carry archetypal symbols that ultimately have an effect on humanity. However, there is a very dark chapter in the research of ley lines that took place during the Third Reich. In fact, efforts were made during this time, especially by the SS, to set up an extensive research department. One such department, for example, was the Department for the Research of Landscape Symbols, which had a lot to do with geomancy. They employed dowsers and the like via the Stiftung Deutsches Ahnenerbe, the German Ancestral Heritage Foundation. Sites were selected on the basis of this research, including the infamous Wewelsburg, which served as a kind of castle for the SS order. It is easy to imagine that occupying such positions of power along these lineage systems, which connect landscapes and places in the spirit, can be extremely tricky as it represents a spiritual influence on the ley lines. For this reason, I am always very critical of such approaches. There is also the Damanhur community, in Italy, for example, who use similar systems. They have large maps on which they use crystals to influence ley lines or similar. This may be well-intentioned, but I still think that there is a certain overpowering element to it. Other people are not asked what energies are put into the ley lines. Granted, a priest doesn't ask which energies he is allowed to use in a church that is on a ley line when he celebrates Mass either, but there is a distinction between a local ritual and the specific manipulation of a ley line network. I wouldn't say it's absolutely forbidden, but as the example of the Third Reich shows, it has a strong ethical component. You shouldn't get too caught up in the idea of omnipotence, that from one point you can imbue the whole earth with a certain spiritual force or thought impulse. Ley lines are a fascinating topic that comes up with many geomancers. It's important to note that the term ley lines is very well known, but we honestly always have to be a little naive when talking to groups we don't know to make sure we're talking about the same thing. There are several very linear systems that permeate the landscape, such as large-scale grid systems, geomantic zones, and others. These all have different qualities, and that doesn't mean that one is wrong and the other is right. It is more about clarifying whether we are talking about the same thing when we say that a ley line intersects here or there. Indeed, the ley lines are a spiritual and mental energetic network, comparable to a meridian system of the earth, which strongly influences the places of power in the world and is therefore a very important topic in geomancy.